Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Israel Hawkins. Well, of course, we have the ongoing crisis with COVID-19, but in particular, the hard-hit country of India is battling with it very difficultly with their low resources to deal with the virus itself, low oxygen supplies, low vaccines, and they're having to deal with mass cremations and burials as well. We're going to take a look at some of the crises that we're having here in the United States in regards to seeming gas shortage, as some gas pumps are running dry due to a cyber attack. And lastly, we're going to be also talking about the ongoing escalation of violence in the Middle East. But first, thousands are continuing to die in India due to COVID-related illnesses as lockdowns continue. Open-air crematoriums and burials are taking place day after day and into the night as family members and others try to keep up with the growing number of deaths in the country of over 1 billion people. Well, in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, 100 bodies of suspected COVID-19 victims have been found floating in the Ganges River. In Gazipur District, Magistrate Mangala Singh said, "Our officials are at the scene and investigating. We are trying to find out where these dead bodies are from."
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, crematoriums are struggling to deal with a huge influx of dead bodies. Residents have informed the local administrations about a shortage of wood for cremations. Now, one resident said that they told the administration that the dead are being thrown into the water because of a shortage of wood. Bodies from about 12 or 13 villages have been thrown into the water.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, the GOA Health Ministry, Mr. Rain, said that they requested 1,200 cylinders, that is of oxygen, but only got 400 because of interrupted oxygen supplies from about 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., which caused, as a result, a lot of deaths. Well, 18 people died this week due to a lack of oxygen supplies in 2 small Indian states. And despite cases dropping in half of Indian states, still 1 in 5 people testing for COVID get a positive result. Well, that's because, in part, the virus is continuing to spread, most notably in the 5 states where regional elections were held in April.
Well, this week's annual Magh Mela festival will have millions of Indians flocking to the Ganges River to swim. But just how clean are the waters of what many call a sacred body of water? Well, take a look at this next video for an eye-opening view on India's Ganges River.
Millions of Hindus will be swimming in the Ganges this week for the annual Magh Mela festival, just as they have for years. But it's not a pleasant swim. The Ganges is one of the world's most polluted rivers. That isn't just a problem for swimmers. More than 500 million people depend on the Ganges as their main source of water. More than 500 million people depend on the Ganges as their main source of water. And despite a multi-billion-dollar cleanup initiative that India announced in 2014, the river hasn't gotten any safer for them.
We have come to see the beautiful Ganga here, to experience its warmth that is giving it to us.
Tell me about the spiritual significance that you feel.
It cannot be said, it is to be felt.
For India's nearly 1 billion Hindus, who believe that if a body is burned and returned to the river at Varanasi, it can escape reincarnation. The Ganges is one of the most sacred places on Earth, but it's also one of the most polluted. Oh, dear Jesus. You can smell it. How much sewage is coming out there right now?
150 million liters per day.
How many people's sewage is that?
1 million.
So that's the shit of a million people. So that's the shit of a million people. So that's the shit of a million people flowing into the Ganga every day.
Yeah. This is just one drain.
Environmental scientist Rakesh Jaiswal has been campaigning for a cleaner Ganges for 25 years.
Today, Ganga is more polluted than it was 30 years ago. And last 24 years, I have seen the situation worsening only. No improvement at all.
In total, drains along the Ganges empty 1 billion gallons of raw sewage and industrial waste into the river every day. Drains along the Ganges empty 1 billion gallons of raw sewage and industrial waste into the river every day. Drains along the Ganges empty 1 billion gallons of raw sewage and industrial waste into the river every day. Decomposing bodies make their way into the water from riverside crematoriums. And in Kanpur, hundreds of tanneries release toxic chemicals and heavy metals into the river, which is the city's source of water.
Half of Kanpur city, including me, was getting drinking water from River Ganga. The water there was highly contaminated, containing city wastewater and also a contaminated discharge from TB hospital, tuberculosis hospital.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, contaminated water puts the population at risk of disease, including cholera, typhoid, and viral diarrhea. Why aren't there processing centers or water treatment facilities or infrastructure basically to...
This is the inability and inefficiency of the government.
So is it purely symbolic?
I would think so. It's the court trying to clean up the river, but with the wrong tool.
When the personhood order was scrapped, a legal route to forcing government action was closed. But not everyone is worried about the toxic waste and sewage that continue to pour into the Ganges. There's a persistent myth among the public and even scientists that the river is so holy, it's essentially self-cleaning.
If you drink the water, then it will help in improvement of your health.
B.D. Tripathi is a professor and former expert for the National Ganga River Basin Authority, the agency responsible for overseeing the implementation of Modi's cleanup program. He is surprisingly optimistic about the situation.
If you increase the flow into the water, then 60 to 80% organic pollution problem will be automatically resolved.
Really?
Yes.
You believe that the River Ganga can heal itself if there's more water in the River Ganga?
Of course, 100% true. If water is there, if flow is maintained, Ganga will solve its own pollution problem. Dilution is the solution of pollution.
So we can still dump sewage into tannery waste?
Yes.
Tripathi's belief in the Ganges' power is misplaced. Industrial waste accumulates in the environment over time and can't simply be diluted. Still, the river's pollution isn't stopping people from going to the Ganges to be cleansed. So you're not sort of bothered by the pollution?
No, not.
Have you guys taken a dip?
I can go do it right now. I'm so fond of Ganga.
You would hop in right now?
Yeah, I love Ganga.
Well, that's amazing that even though, as we just read, there are bodies being dumped in the water and sewage from over 1 million people are being dumped in that water, just downstream from that, people are bathing in that and they still feel that the waters are safe to bathe and drink in.
Right. There has to be a huge amount of bacteria in there, but yet, like you said, they just carry on as normal.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, as mentioned, bodies are bloated and partially burned, and they are on the banks of that river that we just showed you that video of, by families, brought there by families because crematoriums or cremation sites were overwhelmed, or families themselves couldn't afford the wood for funeral pyres. Well, hospitals also don't have enough oxygen or beds for the sick. One man said, "If the oxygen had been there, my aunt and cousin would not have died." Some have taken extreme measures because of their lack of understanding of this disease.
In the northwestern state of Gujarat, people are bathing themselves in fresh, moist, semi-lumpy cow dung in belief that it might protect them from the virus. Now, the concoction is a combination of milk, dung, and urine. Wow. Whew, how about that? Yeah. Well, ambulances line up outside of the crematoriums who struggle to keep up with demand. The World Health Organization is worried about the state of India as well as a newly emerged strain of COVID-19. Now, the World Health Organization's technical lead for COVID-19, Dr. Van Kerkhove, said this variant is of concern on a global level due to its increased transmissibility. And that was a lot of the variants. Remember, they're saying they're transmissible so much easier than the original COVID-19 strain, which in and of itself was pretty easily spread. But now these are many, many times more.
That's right. Well, variant B1617 is the fourth variant to be classified in this category, and it's already spread to over 30 countries, including Australia and the UK. Well, there are also fears the variant could cause a catastrophe in neighboring Nepal, where cases are surging. Despite the World Health Organization declaring a global plateau in new cases, the COVID crisis is far from over. While in India, Prime Minister Modi is facing criticism for not locking down the country sooner.
Well, take a look at this next video as the people of India who consider themselves deeply religious and have the idols or gods to back it up, due to COVID-19's toll on the country and them praying for help from their gods with no relief in sight, they've decided to take matters into their own hands. Take a look.
Well, I kind of have a sneaking suspicion that even some of those gods have a lot of arms. I highly doubt that they are able to swim.
I doubt it. Looks like a lot of them are stone and pretty heavy.
That's right. Well, one of the main pipelines supplying gas and diesel to the east coast of the United States was hacked in a cyber attack. Colonial Pipeline Company, which supplies half of the fuel to the east coast, bringing over 100 million gallons of fuel from the Gulf every day. Well, on Friday, they were hit by a ransomware attack, which locked users out of the system, demanding payment to be let back in. The company temporarily suspended their operation to contain the threat, and the White House has said that they're working with the company to assess the threat and restore operations.
Well, if the shutdown continues for several days, it could raise fears of increased gas prices right before a busy driving season. Now, federal and state representatives are warning citizens not to panic over a fuel shortage, saying that there is not a shortage, but there will be if Americans panic buy. But there kind of is a gas shortage due to the pipeline being shut down that supplies the entire East Coast with fuel. So motorists are finding pumps that are covered up or with signs indicating that there is no gas to buy, or of course the yellow bag that says out of service.
That's right. And people's natural tendency is when you tell them not to panic, that's exactly what they do. They panic. Well, to those on the East Coast and some southern states, it feels like a shortage when they wait in line for gas at a station with only one working pump. A group called Darkside is taking credit for causing the shortage, which allegedly hacked and is extorting millions of dollars from a company that operates the Colonial Pipeline. Well, that ransomware or malware is holding the company hostage, and if no money is paid, then no fuel will flow through those pipelines.
Well, we're now going to turn to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has actually been covering a little bit more on the gas shortage and some of the, as you mentioned, the panic buying that we're seeing people do. Very, very unsafe. He'll have those details, as well as some new changes on the mask mandate that was pretty far and wide across the country and really across the world. Now, as we continue to get further into the COVID-19, we'll see some of these mandates are changing. Larry, what do you have for us?
The connection has already been made by some experts between the increasing level of infectiousness of the world at present and the ability of those same pathogens to access the brain, so that there are also serious questions as to what kinds of behavioral outcomes will eventually begin to manifest as a result of all of the sickness. The nation's latest gas shortage might be one of many potential examples. The U.S.'s precious petrol supply is in jeopardy not because of animosity between itself and oil producers, but due instead to cyber pirates who are holding the productive potential of one of America's largest pipelines hostage for a multi-million-dollar ransom. President Biden is urging calm amid the fears of a petrol famine, but citizens are nonetheless resorting to some pretty outrageous ideas to stock up on gas where it's available, and in some cases, fights are actually breaking out at the pumps as stations go dry. The company, HIT, says it has restored considerable service at this point and is poised to be fully operational quick and soon. And to assist, the federal government is said to be lifting several restrictions such as hour and weight requirements that might impede that process. The crisis has also prompted new legislation calling for the federal government to tighten up on cybersecurity and work more closely with the private sector. In the meantime, as gas begins to trickle back into local stations, consumers in some cases are paying up to $5 per gallon. Those consumed with COVID fatigue are excited at the latest announcement by the CDC lifting restrictions on masks across the board for those who are vaccinated. The only stated exceptions are buses, planes, and hospitals. The president also celebrated the announcement, calling it a great milestone and day for Americans who can now get back to doing what they do best, which is smiling at one another. President Biden cautioned against those who have not yet been fully vaccinated unmasking until they have been completely inoculated. The decision to lift restrictions is said to have come as a result of great pressure on the CDC to issue new guidelines that allow Americans to unmask. YPN News, I'm Larry McGee, the Time Jeff. Back to you.
Well, you think people would think a little bit more safety in regards to safety and trying to get that gas, putting them in bags and things like that. That's not a safe way to transport a flammable substance such as gasoline. Right. Well, the violence continues between Israel and Hamas, and the UN is warning a humanitarian crisis is looming if it doesn't stop. Well, just a week ago, Palestinians took to the streets protesting the inevitable Israeli Supreme Court decision to evict 6 Palestinian families from an Israeli-controlled territory. The Israeli news reported Palestinians threw stones at Israeli police forces in East Jerusalem, who in turn stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Well, just 3 days later, Hamas and Israel were firing rockets at each other, and now 5 days later, almost 1,000 Palestinians have been wounded. Now, Israel has been carrying out airstrikes to hit Hamas targets in Gaza, they say, but also they are destroying many Palestinian homes. Now, one man interviewed by CBS Evening News says they hit us 10 times without warning.
Well, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's top advisor, Mark Regev, was also interviewed and explained, quote, Hamas must understand that shooting rockets into Israel is unacceptable and ultimately it hurts them more than it hurts us, end quote. Well, when it was pointed out that they haven't stopped, Regev answered, quote, and we are not going to stop, end quote. Yeah.
But the retaliatory strikes against Hamas aren't the only problem Israel has been facing. There's been extreme fighting on the ground between mobs of Jews and Israeli Arabs, as well as a deadly protest in the West Bank. Now, there, 9 Palestinians lost their lives after a confrontation with Israeli police. All this in yet another rocket attack on Israel, but this time they came from Syria, who allies themselves with Iran.
Well, if it's hard to imagine the violence going on in Gaza today, this next video will give you a glimpse of the destruction. Various buildings, including people's homes, have been targeted. And watch as Israel destroys this large building in Gaza in a matter of seconds.
And you see from the video there, you know, none of the other buildings around there seem to be even fazed by that one, and that's what Israel has always bragged about. So their so-called accuracy and ability to just take down whatever one building they're going after. But, you know, extreme destruction taking place over there, and as you mentioned, 5 days, 1,000 people, you know, killed or wounded.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Well, if the airstrikes weren't bad enough, now Israel has called up thousands of reserve troops to amass along Gaza's border, setting up artillery batteries and bringing in tanks. Now, there are rockets and artillery fire being exchanged all night long and then continuing into the daytime. Now, this is the worst fighting scene between the two rivals in 7 years.
Well, GMA News met with the Sahab family in Gaza as they were picking up a few of their children's toys out of the pile of rubble that was once their home. Mr. Sahab told how they received a phone call in which they were told they had only 5 minutes to leave their home before it would be attacked.
Not much of a warning.
No, it's
5
not.
minutes. Well, when the sirens sounded in Gaza, terrified residents hurried from their homes to the safety of bomb shelters. Now, packed together like sardines, the combination of body heat and fear make the situation pretty intense.
I bet. Well, China is letting the world know it is not pleased with America's most recent military exercise. Well, why? Well, the U.S. has asked Australia and France to join them along with Japan in Japan's own neighborhood. Well, China, in an editorial, however, has warned, quote, the U.S. would be defeated if any conflict were to break out in the South China Sea, end quote.
Well, China is doing its best to belittle the military exercises. Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry spokesperson Hao Chunying made this statement, quote, the so-called joint military exercises by these countries in speaking has no impact on China at all. They're just burning a little more oil for themselves, end quote.
Yeah, China doesn't really seem to be worried about the military buildup in the South China Sea, considering they have millions and millions of military personnel and the equipment at their disposal.
Right.
Well, never before has Japan joined forces with Australia, France, and the U.S. to participate in war games in the southwestern part of that country. The drills will include fighter jets, amphibious operation exercises, and naval maneuvers. It is popular belief that the agenda of these exercises is to flex their military muscles in the region to intimidate China and deter them from infringing on their borders.
Well, but as we just mentioned, the drills might be working against the goal, seeing that China seems to be a bit provoked by the announcement. Now, in an editorial by China's Global Times newspaper, quote, "The United States will be defeated if it engages in combat with China in its neighboring waters," end quote.
And another article in the same paper said, quote, "The People's Liberation Army, or PLA, doesn't even need to make pointed responses to the joint drills since it's insignificant militarily." Well, the PLA should make concrete steps in its own development like it did with recent drills and warship commissioning, said analysts, end quote.
Well, Japan has had disputes with China for decades over various territories it claims, like the Senkaku Islands. Things have not escalated to war, and China maintains it is not a threat to anyone, but it's just looking to protect its own territorial rights. Now, China has called the Japanese exercises misplaced energy.
Chinese spokesperson Cheng Ying encouraged them to focus their efforts on the pandemic, saying, quote, "I hope you will spend such time, energy, and resources in serving their own people's interest and making more contributions to the current epidemic at home as well as the international anti-epidemic cooperation," end quote. Well, this is just one way there is an increased presence of U.S. military and their allies in the region.
Now, it is pretty interesting comment that the Chinese spokesperson made, in that you're putting all this effort into your war exercises, your war games, while the efforts to stop the spread of COVID-19, or even help the people that are suffering from it, is really kind of pushed to the wayside. So, it is a point to consider, that no matter what the state of affairs is taking place inside a country, they're still always making these preparations for war, practicing, building their military, and making the moves. In a lot of places, it's right along the borders of these countries, like we talked about with Russia many times. So not too concerned with the citizens, so to speak, of their countries, but definitely wanting to make the preparations for war.
And like we've seen with the conflict between Israel and Hamas, or the Palestinians, it's people who are not even involved in these conflicts that are suffering the greatest as a result, the greatest losses as a result. And, considering the fact that COVID-19 knows no countries' borders, you'd think that we would all be working together to kind of get on the same page to kind of try to help put an end to this pandemic. But the minds seem to be continually on not saving life, but taking it, which is going to be the end result with any type of war that takes place.
Right, and it seems as all these things take place, people become more angry. It seems like, the anger is really escalating in people and countries, and the ability to solve conflicts in a peaceful manner has pretty much gone out the window.
That's right. Well, the world right now seems to be continually growing in anger and confusion as they don't know what to do to solve any of the world's problems. Well, of course, there are solutions to these problems that we are currently facing and have been facing for many years. All we have to do is look in the proper place. You can find information on what you can do by contacting the House of Yahweh, because there you will find answers. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
Well, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You could visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@Yahweh.com. And for any international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen right now. And once again, don't forget the two programs are absolutely free. Check them out when you have time. The Yisrael Says program by going to YisraelSays.com, and the Ask Yisrael program by going to AskYisrael.com. Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another message, exciting message from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.